Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine War breaking news special where I'm going to be talking about the arrival of Emmanuel Macron, Keir Starmer, Friedrich Merz, Donald Tusk into Kyiv to meet with Zelensky and to attempt to thrash out a 30-day ceasefire agreement. I think that's on the cards, but also show their support in a unified way. And actually it is quite marked in terms of the body language, but also the fact they're all there at the same time together and we're on a train together, and there's footage of that. And I think it's a really strong statement, possibly aimed at saying something to the United States. Meanwhile, and we're going to start with the United States before we get to that point, we're going to start with the United States and actually Russia. So what Russia are presently saying, the US has been talking about a 30-day ceasefire that has been left as a seed to germinate. That seed was planted by Zelensky himself as he phoned Trump the other day, and then Trump came out saying, yeah, 30-day ceasefire, and then putting that to Russia, sounding that out, and Russia appeared to be not in denial. They're flatly refusing to do so, putting their own maximalist demands back in order to get to a point of having a ceasefire. Now, Anton Gerashenko here talks about Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, saying that Russia might agree to a ceasefire if Ukraine's allies stop supplying weapons to Ukraine. Russia is not going to stop receiving supplies from North Korea, though. In that case, they will not stop their military production and recruiting new soldiers. So Russia is playing for time and lying. Nothing new here, says Anton Gerashenko, and that's exactly right. As an analysis of what Peskov is saying, the position of Russia. Russia demanding that Europe's and allies of Ukraine stop providing weapons to Ukraine. That's never going to happen. That will not happen. And Russia know that won't happen. And so therefore they're putting unrealistic demands into the agreement here in order to achieve a ceasefire. Meanwhile, they will continue to receive weapons from their allies. We are hearing that actually they're going to receive Fateh launchers from Iran. That's the latest. And North Korea, as we'll see in a second, have just doubled down on their support for Russia. And so this is complete double standards from the Russians, demanding that the Ukrainians get no assistance while taking assistance themselves, and having that as a prerequisite for a ceasefire. In other words, they're not really serious about a ceasefire. Now, the question is, what does the US do about that? So here, Kyiv Independent reports Kremlin rejects a 30-day ceasefire as long as Ukraine receives weapons. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov rejected the idea of a 30-day ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, claiming in an interview with ABC News on May the 10th that it would be, quote, an advantage for Ukraine. But the ceasefire, of course, will be a massive advantage for Russia, and in fact it's not an advantage for Ukraine. Well, the advantage for Ukraine is that more people like Ukraine than Russia, right? I guess if they got China more formally on side, then things would be a little bit different. But that's obviously going to be the situation when you are clearly the bad guys. Kim Jong Un, the North Korean dictator, said that North Korea's involvement in the Russia-Ukraine war is justified and a sovereign act in defense of a, quote, brother nation. He warned of military action if the US provocations against Russia continue. So Kim Jong Un is seeing that the US is provoking Russia, even though the US has stepped back and is pretty much doing not doing that. So that's quite bizarre. But anyway, what you get is a doubling down, as I say, of support for Russia from North Korea and indeed from Iran. All the while, we have US sort of going all over the shop. A couple of interesting articles, I think, that we're going to dip into before we get to what's going on in Kyiv right now. We're going to start with this Bloomberg article that says Europe is in talks with the US over the ultimatum to end the war in Ukraine. So part of the reason I think that the European leaders have gone in unison to Kyiv to meet with Zelensky is to thrash out a 30-day ceasefire deal that the US can sign up to. So it's like the Europeans, I think, are sort of taking the lead here in trying to get things moving. So this Bloomberg article says, I'm going to pick parts out from it. So the plans aren't yet final, and moving forward still hinges on the US, which has called for a month-long unconditional truce and for Russia and Ukraine to both be held accountable for respecting the sanctity of direct negotiations. Quote, if the ceasefire is not respected, the US and its partners will impose further sanctions, US President Trump said in a Truth Social post earlier this week. But of course, you need to get to a ceasefire, right? There doesn't seem to be any accountability for Russia for not coming to the table, for not agreeing to the, it's easy to say, right, when we have a ceasefire, if you break it, this is going to happen. But you're saying nothing about ramifications if you don't even get to the ceasefire. If you are so intransigent that you're not agreeing to do a ceasefire, oh, that's fine. We'll just keep going. But I do sense that the US is getting frustrated, and that's where the Wall Street Journal article next is going to come in. Really interesting moments in there. But anyway, in this Bloomberg piece, we carry on later. Meanwhile, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said in a briefing Friday that Europe is, quote, on board for Trump's proposal. Diplomatic efforts to end the longest and bloodiest conflict in Europe since World War II have intensified after several meetings with European, US and Ukrainian envoys, including in London and Paris. Those leaders held another a series of phone calls this week, and Zelensky met Trump at the Vatican on April the 26th when world leaders gathered for the funeral of Pope Francis. European and US officials said privately that views on the conflict within the White House have since hardened, with Putin now seen as an impediment to peace efforts. That's really, really important. Now, that's super important. So this is a claim that Putin is now seen as an obstacle to peace efforts. Putin is in the way. Now, if that is the case, and you're starting to get a general sentiment within the White House among those people who are otherwise pro-Putin, otherwise anti-Ukraine, then that is significant. So that is a really important paragraph there. But, European and US officials have said privately, we don't know who that is and who this pertains to. But if true, that's really good news. Although it's ridiculously late in the day, right? That you think, and this is where we're going to get to some further claims in a little while, that you think Putin is intransigent like 10 years, 11 years after 2014, that you think he's going to be a difficult person to negotiate with, that he's not to be trusted. I mean, we knew that. We've known that, you and I, for ages, right? That the White House is only just coming to that realization is absolute insanity. Quote, what I would say right now, the Russians are asking for a certain set of requirements, a certain set of concessions in order to end the conflict. We think they're asking for too much, US Vice President J.D. Vance said this week, and I've talked about that previously. On Friday, Zelensky said Ukraine has had, quote, positive and productive communication with the US recently. We're on the same page, all on the same page there. Has to be a full ceasefire. And if Russia keeps dragging out the war, we'll need stronger sanctions, especially if they break the ceasefire when it finally happens. But actually, I wouldn't concentrate on that bit when they break the ceasefire. I'd be concentrating, and if Russia keeps dragging out the war, we'll need stronger sanctions. There need to be stronger sanctions on Russia at the moment for not playing ball. And that's kind of what Trump it's not kind of, it's what he very publicly said before he was elected. We will whack massive sanctions on Russia and we will give Ukraine all the weapons they need if Russia's not going to play ball. Well, they're not, and you're not doing that. You're now moving the goalposts and saying, well, we'll do that if they break a ceasefire. Well, that's not what you said before. Anyway, Ukraine is seeking a US security backstop to prevent future Russian attacks, Zelensky said earlier. Quote, there are two directions. Either we have foreign contingent in large numbers, or it is a smaller contingent that also has something like Article 5, Zelensky said on May the 3rd, referring to NATO's core statute, a model like Israel has, which is to a large extent the US backstop, he added. The US has previously floated proposals to end the war that would broadly freeze the conflict along current lines, leaving most of the territory occupied by Russia in Moscow's hands. The Trump administration is also prepared to recognize the Ukrainian region of Crimea as Russian, Bloomberg reported on April in April. Ukraine's NATO aspirations would be off the table. Sanctions on Russia would be lifted, while Kyiv would receive strong security guarantees to ensure that any deal holds. The Trump administration also wants Moscow to return Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the biggest in Europe, which it seized earlier in the war. The facility would then come under US control to administer energy to both sides. I mean, it seems ridiculous that Russia would get to invade, take control of a nuclear power plant, then give it to the US, and the US would use that to give power back to Russia. It's just like total appeasement. But anyway, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. We're going to go to Wall Street Journal article now. Trump promised to end 2 wars quickly. In private, he admits he's frustrated. The president has told donors resolving the conflict has been more difficult than he thought. Again, this goes back to an irresponsible lack of knowledge of this conflict and any conflict. So I'm sorry, but I am going to say, and in fact, there's something I'm going to share with you on the on my US video, which is when Keir Starmer passed the letter of offering Trump to come to have a full state visit and meet the king. Trump handed the letter back to Keir Starmer to get him to read it, and there are lots of people still talking about how Trump essentially doesn't read and can't read. Some people are saying he's dyslexic. Some people, lots of claims around that. But the point is, and again, I know I belabor this point, but it is so super important. If you are the president of the United States and you have been president before, from 2016 to 2020, and you have dealt with Putin before, and you are now in charge again, and in that intervening time, you've done absolutely no research on anything. Like literally no research yourself. You've not read anything because you don't read, possibly because you can't read very well. There are claims that he's never even read his own book, his ghost-written book, The Art of the Deal. Then how are you building up a knowledge base in order to deal with really, really difficult situations like this? Like, if you have not learnt anything about Russia, its history and culture and its leaders and its politics, if you learnt nothing about Ukraine, its history, its leaders, its politics, its people, its culture, and the geopolitics surrounding those two nations, if you know nothing about that other than what you remember from being told stuff about this and for when you were last president, but you appear to have learnt nothing more, then you are in an exceptionally poor position to be able to negotiate to negotiate a peace on behalf of these two countries. And the idea that you are morally and politically, it appears, on the side of Russia more than on the side of Ukraine, shows that you just don't have a grasp of this situation. This is really, really unacceptable in my books. It's absolutely unacceptable. So when you finally get to this realization that, do you know what, this is much more difficult than I thought, my reaction is, no shit, Sherlock. Like, honestly, mate, what were you thinking? That you could, you actually thought you could solve this within a day. Crazy. So President Trump spoke to a room of top donors in his Florida club last week, and he described ending Russia's war in Ukraine as a growing frustration that keeps him up at night. People in the room said, that you wouldn't realize this before you became president shows how ignorant, and I mean that technically, like how ignorant of everything concerning this war you were and you are. And that makes you deeply irresponsible. You absolutely need to spend some time. This is lazy. You are lazy. You are not prepared to put the effort in to learn about this situation so that you can be in the best position to try and solve this situation. And instead, you just get more and more frustrated because it turns out that Putin is actually the dictator everyone has told you he was since day one. But you still have this opinion of Putin that you had when you walked out that press briefing in Helsinki in 2018. And he's also saying the war in Gaza was also notably challenging. Well, yeah, again, that one's been going on a long time, that one has, and you ain't solving that quickly either. When Trump campaigned to return to power, he vowed to end both of those wars diplomatically and argued that neither conflict would have begun if he was in the White House at the time. Oh, God, I'm so tired of hearing that. He would even end the war in Ukraine on day one, he said. Instead, As he passes the 100-day mark of his second term and neither conflict closer to resolution, negotiations to end Iran's nuclear program stalled and a trade war straining relationships with allies, Trump is finding solving the world's problems more difficult than he had thought. Quote, bluster and theatrics have their role in diplomatic high-wire acts, but so did details and hard work. That's the point. Details and hard work. Honestly, so well said Dan Baer, a former ambassador in the Obama administration who is now at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in Washington. Trump has since said he was joking about ending the Russia-Ukraine war in record time, and I've talked about that plenty of times recently, and that supporters know he was being hyperbolic. Absolutely nonsense. We know he said it's all in complete seriousness, and he said it something like, well, he's at least 55 times he's been caught saying that, or 53 times or something like that. Kyle Haynes, a professor of US foreign policy at Purdue University, said if he hadn't promised such things repeatedly throughout the campaign, it'd be wildly unfair to criticize him for failing to achieve them. But he did. You know, he said that in all seriousness, so he needs to be held to account for claiming he would solve it within one day, and even before the inauguration. Okay. To continue, in recent weeks, Trump has privately griped at two advisors that Putin doesn't want to end the war and that both sides refuse to compromise. Trump has also asked advisors if they believe Putin has changed since Trump's last time in office and expressed surprise at some of Putin's military moves, including bombing areas with children, according to people familiar with the remarks. Now, this shows how utterly ignorant Donald Trump is. And I'm not trying to be anti-Trump here. I'm literally, these are the facts, right? If you are coming into power in the most powerful position in the world as the President of the United States, and you don't understand what Vladimir Putin has done in Grozny, you don't understand the Chechenian conflicts, you don't understand the Georgian conflicts and the bombing and the red flag bombings, the apartment bombings of 1999, was it? If you don't understand that Putin has done that, then you don't understand Putin. You have no grasp on who this man is. If you have no desire to learn history, then you are coming into this thinking Putin is someone he truly isn't. And then when you get to the point where you're like, I can't believe Putin's bombing apartment blocks with children in it, everyone else is like, I can believe that because he's done it before. I can fully believe that. What do you mean you can't? You're surprised at this? Do you not know anything about Putin? Oh, no, you actually don't. You just think he's some marvellous guy because you've been listening to frickin' Tucker Carlson too much. And when you sit in an ecosystem of Tucker Carlson and Donald Trump Jr. and David Sachs and Elon Musk, then this is what happens. And do you know what? I frickin' told you so. I'm happy to say that. But anyway, earlier this year, Trump said he believed Kyiv would be harder to convince than Russia unless the deal terms were Ukraine's terms, resulting in a combative Oval Office encounter with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky live on TV. More recently, senior Trump administration officials have acknowledged that Russia remains the biggest holdout, refusing to agree to an unconditional 30-day ceasefire that Kyiv has already supported and instead seeking more concessions from Ukraine. Yes! And we're going to come on to this because Phillips O'Brien has just talked about this. Russia are not only not doing a deal, but they're actually saying they want even more. They're going in the opposite direction. Quote, I wouldn't say that the Russians are uninterested in ending the conflict, Vice President J.D. Vance told a Munich Security Forum event in Washington on Wednesday. We think they're asking for too much. Trump's early plans for the conflict were also upended within weeks. Russia complained about Trump's first Ukraine envoy, Keith Kellogg, over the retired general's daughter's support for Kyiv. Trump then told Kellogg only to talk to the Ukrainians and tapped Steve Witkoff, his longtime friend serving as a Middle East envoy, to step in. Kellogg and his team have argued that the diplomat has been effective in getting Kyiv to buy into Trump's peace process. Witkoff has repeatedly pressed both sides to accept some terms they don't like, and now Witkoff has told others he just wants to get the two sides to the table, which he hasn't yet been able to do. Other US officials have also suggested Trump may consider his job done if he gets the Russians and Ukrainians to engage in serious direct negotiations. What happens after that will be up to them, allowing the US to focus on other priorities, the officials said. So I think that's, and there's more in there. Really interesting article. I was just looking at one of the comments underneath, which is bang on, which is, if you don't grasp the facts, you can't propose a reasonable solution. This goes to exactly what I've just been saying. If you don't grasp the facts, you can't propose a reasonable solution. Ukraine is being invaded by Russia. How can Ukraine compromise? If someone burgles your house, poor old Doris being brought in here. If someone burgles your house, you don't compromise by allowing the burglar to keep your stuff and promising not to press charges. That's a perfect encapsulation of what's going on. And it's good to see that people realise this. Now, Phillips O'Brien has come out and said Trump is one of the worst negotiators in foreign policy history, as the deal with the Houthis shows. When it comes to Putin, he has already given away the farm, so that Putin's negotiation floor is higher than the ceiling would have been under Biden or with Biden. That's a really good point. So, like I've said, you normally go into negotiations where one side is here and the other side is here. But the US forced Ukraine to put their ceiling above the floor of what would have been acceptable by already saying, well, you're going to give away this, you're going to concede territory, you're going to do this, you can't be in NATO. And Ukraine have been saying, hang on, you're handing away all of our bargaining chips. And so now we have to start up here and we'll go somewhere in the middle. So we end up going up. This is now the middle. The middle is here because the floor has been put up to here. Right? That was Ukraine's ceiling previously. It's now above the floor of Russia. So it would have been between here and here and you meet somewhere in the middle. It's now between here and here and you meet somewhere in the middle. And so Russia are getting much more of what they want. Oh, and by the way, Phillips O'Brien then goes on to say, and what Putin is doing is taking advantage of Trump's poor deal making to try and get even better terms. So this is a quote from his own article, I presume. And guess what? Putin is not such an incompetent negotiator. So instead of thanking Trump for everything Trump has done for him, Putin has tried to get more. He has rejected the deal for now, has continued to fight and ask for more to get him to consider signing up to any deal. For instance, the Russians have said they don't just want the US not to pledge itself to defend Ukraine. They don't want European forces in Ukraine as well, etc., because Trump negotiated so poorly does not mean that everyone else has to. So the idea here is that Putin is a much better negotiator and he's driving a really bloody hard bargain. Now, on to what this video should really be more mainly about. Which is the visit of the Europeans to Kyiv. US and European allies are finalising a 30-day ceasefire proposal for Ukraine and Russia, with new sanctions on Moscow if rejected, a French diplomatic source told Reuters. So that seems to be on the cards from a European point of view. And it's great to see these people here. They are on the train, on the special kind of diplomatic train that goes into Kyiv. Here we have Friedrich Merz, Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron. I presume Donald Tusk came in slightly separately, maybe. I don't know.
It's literally. We came through Germany, and then we made it to France. We got through the border.
And there for the photo op. Now, I'm going to be a bit pro Starmer here because I was just thinking about this earlier. And all my biases, my biases, and some of you keep having a go at me for that. But I was just thinking from a British political point of view, like what were the other options? Kemi Badenoch, Nigel Farage. My goodness, I prefer someone as just stable and competent as Keir Starmer here. Just kind of like Emmanuel Macron and Friedrich Merz. I don't agree with Merz's domestic politics particularly, but actually I have faith that these three just have Ukraine's outcomes and they just have Ukraine's back. And I'm just thankful that you've got these three there at the centre and Donald Tusk as well. I just think that they are all pretty solidly pro-Ukraine and also pretty competent, probably negotiators and leaders in these kinds of contexts. I mean, just imagine if we had Nigel Farage there sort of laughing and essentially being just pro-Trump and pro-Russia to some degree. Remember, Nigel Farage was working for Russia Today, did appear on Russia Today a number of times. Right. Macron, Tusk, Starmer, and Germany's new Chancellor Merz, together with Zelensky and the First Lady, commemorated the warriors who gave their lives for Ukrainian independence and freedom, eternal glory and gratitude to the heroes, those who are no longer with us, but who will remain forever in our hearts, eternal memory to those who gave their lives defending Ukraine, Zelensky posted on Twitter. And here we have Tusk, Starmer, First Lady, Zelensky, Macron and Merz. Really great to see them all together. And we have, I think, I like this. So I'm going to play you a bit of this because I often talk about this, concentrate on the little things, and they give you a really transparent window into what's going on. Oftentimes, it's about the physicality between these guys. Like, can you imagine JD Vance or Donald Trump hugging Zelensky and being like this? Absolutely not. And so there's Tusk. That was a more kind of like, meh, okay, not so close. Merz is a new leader. Zelensky has no relationship yet with Zelensky. But then we've got a bit of a stronger one from Starmer, and then we've got, look at this, good old French hug there from Emmanuel Macron, and just the smiles, and you know, there is a relationship there and a warmth and a genuine I think concern for Ukraine, and that just comes through in the physicality there. So it's interesting that Merz is a new leader, doesn't have that yet with Zelensky. Tusk doesn't have that. He's not as close, I think, as say Starmer and Macron. So yeah, really good images coming out from this. I mean, look at that. That's pretty iconic, I think. And a lovely day for that. I've been there. That's in Kyiv. Actually really close to the Hotel Ukrainska where we stayed, was just sort of up there to the left, behind here. And yeah, it's very moving, these sort of flags and this whole area. And there's a memorial board around the corner as well. So yeah, historic moment in Kyiv. For the first time since the war began, the leaders of the UK, France, Germany and Poland have arrived together alongside Zelensky and the First Lady. They visited Independence Square Memorial. Just a really, as I say, iconic photo, that. And Tendar, German analyst, says joint statement by Germany, UK, France and Poland with regard to Ukraine. 1. We, the political leaders of France, Germany, Poland and UK, show solidarity with Ukraine, facing together the ongoing and barbaric invasion of Russia. 2. We reaffirm our support for President Trump's demand for a peaceful solution. Russia has to stop all obstructions in finding a sustainable peace. Now, what's interesting here is and I'm going to be a bit cynical here, what the Europeans are going to have to do is somehow big up Trump and say how wonderful he is, and that Trump is really kind of leading this while actually leading it themselves. So what's Trump doing? Well, we know he desires peace. He keeps saying, I want peace, but he's kind of both sidesist, isn't he? Like, I want all these soldiers to stop dying, although he's starting to realise that Putin's doing horrible things and bombing civilians and not really playing ball. But he's always been about, I want peace on day one, etc., etc. So we reaffirm our support in President Trump's demand for a peaceful solution. It doesn't really say anything that. Of course, we all want a peaceful solution, but is as a statement to say we're reaffirming Trump's demand, then it sets Trump at the kind of center of this as being like, it's all about me type thing, and that's very clever positioning from the Europeans. Russia has to stop all obstructions to finding a sustainable peace. Together with the USA, we demand a complete and unconditional ceasefire for 30 days in order to find space for negotiations resulting in a just peace. We stand ready to support peace talks aimed at a technical implementation of a ceasefire and a preparation of a comprehensive peace agreement as soon as possible. It's clear to us that bloodshed must end. Russia must end its illegal war of aggression, and Ukraine must be enabled to develop as a sovereign nation within its internationally recognized borders, including for future generations. We will continue to expand our support for Ukraine. So, okay, this is where we're going to circle back to the beginning. So, circling back to the beginning right now, we have Peskov saying Russia is not going to stop receiving supplies from North Korea and they won't stop their military production and recruiting new soldiers. So we're going to continue building up our military. But we demand that in order for there to be a ceasefire, Ukraine's allies must stop supplying weapons to Ukraine. And meanwhile, the allies are saying, We will continue to expand our support for Ukraine. As long as Russia does not agree to a permanent ceasefire, we will continue to increase pressure on Russia's war machine. In other words, there's an intractable situation. So the Russians have said, the Allies can't continue to support Ukraine. They need to stop doing that in order for us to have a ceasefire. And the Allies have said, we're going to continue doing that as long as Russia does not agree to a permanent ceasefire. We'll continue to increase pressure on Russia's war machine. And so it's a game of chicken. And at the moment, no one is blinking or flinching. So Friedrich Merz has said there will be a serious tightening of sanctions and large-scale assistance to Ukraine will continue. And there you go. Political, financial, and military. Donald Trump is obviously losing patience with Putin. Interesting to throw that in there. Macron said this is a proposal that we put forward together with the US, and Ukraine accepted it on March the 11th. Russia is still stalling for time, imposing conditions, winning time, and continuing its war of conquest. So the Europeans know what's going on. The US, the White House is starting to understand what is going on. And all the while, people are dying. But I think, the coalition of the willing versus the coalition of the warring. There you go. I don't know if there's anything else to add to that, but I thought I would give you a sort of rundown of what's going on and give you this visit to Kyiv in the context that I think it needs to be laid out. So that's understanding where the US is and actually where the US might be moving, which is more towards that Russia is an obstacle, Putin is an obstacle to peace, and that final kind of penny dropping it's amazing it's taking so long, but if it does drop and the US do start to come on board with supporting Ukraine, then obviously that's a great thing, but at the cost of so many unnecessary Ukrainian deaths. We've had 3 months plus of the US being in the wrong place. And then we had 7 months of them stopping US military aid back in 2024, was it? And it's just absolutely incredible that this is taking so long. But hopefully, if we get the Trump administration realizing who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, then we can actually start moving in the right direction. Anyway, let me know what you think. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.